One.
Good afternoon, Honourable Speaker.
1724. 16.
In moving this motion, I'm going to tell you a story. This will not be easy for me, so I ask for your patience. Early one beautiful morning, my sweet, bossy 12-year-old tells me she is going to school early to set up and have for a fun day, having promised the teachers she would be there by 8 o'clock. With the biggest, most excited smile on her face, on a high from her end of primary school celebration and prize winning, she whips out the door. Just a few hours later, busily working away in my office, I received from a call from a number I did not know. Upon answering, I hear a little voice saying, "Oh, hey Bubby, what's up? You okay?" After a moment of silence, my friend takes the phone and says, "Hey ma'am, there's been an incident at school. You'd better come pick her up." Curious and a bit nervous, I grab my keys, tell the office I'll be back shortly, and rush off to the school. As I turn onto the street, I am shocked by the number of cars. I quickly jump on the phone to let my boss know it's a bit more serious than a sick kid. There are police and security guards at intervals along the fence line. There are plastic sheets up near the trees, ambulance and police cars on the oval. The scene is so surreal, it reminds me of scenes from movies or journalist reports of bomb threats. I start to imagine all kinds of possibilities. Other parents are arriving and we start to congregate together, each wondering what has happened. The rumours are starting. I've heard all sorts of things. The school has put a post on Facebook for everyone to collect their children. Do you know where we need to go? We stop and ask directions from a young officer stationed near the gate. Are we allowed in? She recommends we head to the front office but is not sure of any details. We continue up the path to the office where we are all shocked to find out they don't know where our kids are. We try their classrooms. Heading around the corner, I walk past teachers crying and hugging each other. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. The feeling of trepidation grows. Arriving at the classroom, I find a circle of children in tears and in distress. Some are holding tight to parents, many haven't yet arrived. I find mine and a couple of extras to support. They cling in a way no one can quite imagine. These incredible miniature adults, reduced to terrified little kids. Holding tight, they try and open up, but mostly they are incoherent. The loudest sound from them: "Wait, I want to stay. I need to know how my friends are." There are police trying to check off the attendance list and making sure everyone is accounted for. Parents continue to trickle in. My husband arrived as the Facebook post gains traction. I think it was close to an hour before most of the parents had arrived, and the principal who had come up to help from a different school had taken over minding the classroom, shoos us all out the door. As we walk away with a bit more understanding of what is happening, paying more attention to the ambulances, the helicopters, the material wrapped around the trees, and our little girl holding tight to our hands, describing what she saw and pointing out the details, it begins to dawn on us what she has escaped. And so the most harrowing few days of our lives arrive. And when I say our, I mean all the mums and dads who had children on the oval that day. The confusion over the next few days as we all try to come to grips on what our children have seen and experienced. Phone calls from the school confirming that the rumours are true and there are children no longer alive. As the news comes in, 1, 2, 3 more. How do you tell your 12-year-old their friends are gone? What do you say when their innocence is stolen and they are confronted with their own mortality? These kids were so desperate to see each other. We sent out an invitation on the grapevine and offered to host an afternoon tea in a couple of days so they could feel, hear, touch and know that who was still there. Next thing we know, we're getting phone calls from police asking us to postpone to make sure these kids' stories don't get mixed up so they can make statements. Really not a phone call anyone would ever expect to receive. Laying flowers, dodging journalists, police interviews. We are told the details of the children gave were so clear that they would one day be able to digitally recreate the event to help our families who no longer had children to tell them, to understand what happened to them. The Lions Club find every child and give them a teddy. And then the funeral started. 6 separate funerals over 2 weeks, with Christmas in the middle. They were all special and they were all heartbreaking. And one day, we will balance the score with more adult funerals attended than children's in our lives. And over this time, our kids are telling us more and more. How one kid saved by quick actions, how they helped with first aid when there were no other adults available. How parents came to the classroom to see how their children, to find their children, and were told that they were taken in ambulances. How the kids reacted with fight, flight and freeze. And how kids watched as others were resuscitated, wanting to help. And some other details I would not repeat. And I don't tell you this story for its sensationalist appeal. I want to tell you the story of how the communications are managed through this season and how we still have questions unanswered, and why we, as representatives of our communities, need to make sure we do better now and next time. Over the first few days, we started to realise there was communication being missed. During a crisis, it is normal to monitor the media and find out about the significant facts, but as the world starts to move on and the media cycle shifts to the next story, the community in the middle of the event starts to expect more and direct and specific communications. In this case, we observed the expressions used and noticed a pattern whereby our families were kind of forgotten. People talk about the families affected, and that refers to the children who died and their families, and the ones who were reported seriously injured. They talk about the trauma experienced by first responders, referring to the emergency staff who were called on to help. Oh, thank you. They talk about the school community as a whole, and they talk about the heartbroken Devonport community, where I would be surprised to find anyone without a close connection to someone from the school. But somehow, the fact that these kids were right there, were participants, witnesses, first aiders, and they are grieving an incredible loss, has not been overlooked, but has not been fully recognised. I don't want to disparage the services that were set up to support these kids, the parents that wanted to access them. Everything has been done in our community's best interest. The main issue we have had is the lack of communication about these things. The uncertainty over the future plans and the lack of recognition regarding what these young people have been going through and how quickly they were expected to bounce back. Since December 2021, I can count the number of official communications my family has received on one hand. I have received a phone call in mid-afternoon to confirm that children had died. I do not envy the staff who have tasked with that call. We received a letter in early January from the Premier's office offering reimbursement of costs incurred. I don't know how many families took this up. Many parents looked at it confused, wondering how they were going to get reimbursed for pizza and McDonald's and the special treats and presents that they had supplied to their children in their effort to get smiles on their face and food in their bellies. But it was kindly offered and it was appreciated. We received a letter around March regarding PTSD testing for those identified as being most likely and significantly affected. We were offered to discuss this with the head of CALMS, who was particularly experienced in this area. We received some personal follow-up from that testing in regarding the recommendations for action after that testing, and we received an invitation to a barbecue for the families on the anniversary. The delivery of these communications has left us confused about the excuses for why regular communications could not have been set up and why we could not have been informed better. They had our contact details. There are not that many of us. How hard can it be? Since the incident and until now, there has been regular and incidental reports in newspapers on the court cases happening or announcements regarding investigations into the incident. Can you imagine how a 13-year-old feels when they see photos pop up on social media and they hear people who weren't there claiming all sorts of things about what they witnessed and all those memories coming flooding back? The families we have felt unable to protect our children from these incidental reports because we have received no warning that they would be happening. I feel today like I am betraying them, and I'm here contributing to that in a public arena. But this needs to be said. We need our voices to be heard, and we need to be here to make sure we do better in the next season, and we do better if another incident occurs. We never know what is going to happen around the corner, and we need to make sure we are always learning. Speaker, in several circumstances, myself and others have reached out to the Education Department through teachers and principals, through counselling services, through the Devonport Council staffer who was seconded to the coordination and recovery. We have tried to say, we need more information and we need you to communicate us directly. We need to understand what is going on, and yet nothing has changed. With the new school year in 2022, we were all returned back to a rhythm of what is normal. We came against several issues where it became obvious that the school staff had not been adequately prepared. I'll set the scene for you. When the event occurred, there were approximately 45 children on the oval. Around 30 of them were year 6 and around 15 year 5. So come the first day of the next school year, we have around 25 at high school and 15 at primary school, along with our other younger siblings, teachers and other staff. There were significant supports set in place at Hillcrest. I was informed there were several relief teachers on hand to swap into classes in case teachers needed a moment. There were counselling services based there and additional support staff, etc. At the feeder high school, there was a roster system of counselling services set up, and the teaching staff were encouraged to not bring up the incident so as to avoid too much conversation in the classroom and to keep the kids safe. With teenagers, it is hard to know what is best, so this approach seemed reasonable. However, this meant that there was no explanation to the kids as to how they accessed the services provided. After investigation for ourselves, there was a policy, an extensive process in place at the school which required these kids to tell their story to multiple people prior to accessing services. Despite this inquiry and subsequent conversations, the school did not put into place a system of simple communication with these 25 families to ensure that they were aware of how to support their children or changes and important information. This may have changed in the last little while. My child is no longer there, so it could have been improved. Honourable Speaker, I have always been a very laid-back parent, encouraging my children to develop their independence. After this incident, I became that parent. At the beginning of the year, I couldn't sign the excursion form or the approval for photos. This is the reaction I had when I was confronted to my child's mortality and the publicity of the event. I had seen my daughter on the front page of The Advocate too many times. So I got a lot of calls from the school in the first 6 months. One day her teacher called me to let me know about a moment in drama class. They had played a very common game, I'm sure we have all played it in high school, where we were imagining a situation and adding a piece of the story by person. Problem was, they didn't really think about who they were playing this game with, and they chose the theme emergency. Here I was, less than 3 months since the most unimaginable emergency had occurred, to my child in a school, having to yet again console her because someone did not think about what these kids have been going through and that dredging that up would perhaps upset them. It doesn't feel like rocket science to me, but for a young teacher who was just drawing on what she knew, it was not front of mind. She was obviously very apologetic, but it was just one example that there was not enough consideration and time spent supporting the staff. Catching up with another parent soon after, I was able to explain to her why her child did not want to go to drama. This parent responded with a story of her own about how her child had come home from a swimming excursion stressed out about having to stand on a bus. This seems fairly reasonable. The trip was short, time is of the essence, and I'm sure we have all experienced standing room only on buses. But in a time when risk assessment should be under a microscope and when there was a large contingent of highly vulnerable students travelling, questions get raised. This parent raised her questions with the Education Department directly and asked for the policy around buses. She was promised a review. I'm not sure what has happened with that, and I might ask the Education Minister tomorrow. Various of us have reached out, trying to find the right person to talk to and to help set up a communication strategies and to be kept informed. As it turns out, that recovery is managed by the Premier's office. Questions usually ended up lost in the ether. Over and over again, we see a culture of secrecy and protection in our public service. We know there are great people that work for Tasmania, but we need to have a culture of oversharing, not a culture of hiding behind excuses. From day one, counselling services have been the main form of support given to our families. The direct funding for this was finalised at the end of last financial year, according to the service providers. I have never received any communication to confirm or deny this, and assume it is correct. My daughter's counsellor was not comfortable with this decision and encouraged me to call and contact people to ask for extension. Not knowing where to start, I did not manage to make this happen. She assured me she would pass it up the train. This is the part of the story where we see discrepancies between adults and children and treatments. Our government legislation protects some, but not always others. Staff of the school, emergency workers, employees and volunteers who are some way connected to this event, all these people have requirements for employment assistance programs and return to work plans and so forth. Some of these amazing people who pour out their hearts and souls into helping on this day have taken off time off work for a very long time. For some of them, this was the last straw after dealing with COVID for the previous 18 months, and it would not surprise me that some of them are still not at work or have never gone back to their full capacity prior to this event. We don't see these supports removed through an arbitrary decision with no consultation. These supports are managed carefully and with consideration of individual circumstances. I'm sure the advice to a staged approach to removal of relief supports as recovery kicks in is appropriate, but without clear communications and education as to the plan and what actions those involved need to take in response, we are left feeling forgotten and discarded. The day before this incident, my family had enjoyed one of the most proud moments of our lives when our incredible little kid won the school award for excellence in academics. She won a voucher to the bookshop, and being the bookworm that she is, we took her to spend her voucher in the afternoon to try and distract her from her shock and in the hope she could hide away in a book when she needed to. Last I checked, she had never read the book she bought that day. It's very hard to celebrate an achievement when your competition is no longer around. Quite the same. 2.5 years on, the trauma from this incident has subsided. For many, although it's hard to be sure what actions can be attributed to one event and what could be attributed to hormones and normal development. For my child, she has started seeing yet another counsellor. I think this is number 5, having been referred by her GP for her anxiety levels a few months ago. We continue to have an occasional moment when we need to remind her that her friends are okay, that it's okay to have friends, and not to be afraid of what might happen to them. For these families, we are currently in a sea, not a storm, but a void where information has yet to reach us. It looks to be many years before we have conclusion on the coroner's inquest, particularly due to the need for WorkSafe to prosecute their investigative findings. I have spoken to legal connections who understand the reasons behind these delays, but I do not know how many others have been able to uncover this. Our questions are not complicated. You've probably been thinking them. Is the memorial going to be built by this anniversary, and if so, what is the unveiling or the service and what's the plans? When will the coroner's inquest be? Will our children be asked to testify? Can we attend? Will we be able to see the reproduction of the event? When can we expect some closure? What services are our children able to access now, and can we be sure of consistency of service provision? And lastly, but most importantly, until there has been a coroner's report with a determination as to what was the cause of this horrendous event, how can anyone take the steps to make sure it does not happen again? Since being elected, I've been advocating for improved communications and answers to these questions in the background. I have met with the DPAC staffer who was tasked with managing the recovery response to this event, and I know there has been no deliberate action to ignore our families. We have discussed the key stakeholders identified in the process and the strategies put in place to support them. This week I have received assurances on some movement on this, but frustratingly it has taken me to being elected to Parliament to find the right person to talk to be able to feel heard. Interestingly, in reviewing these ends, I see that we were identified at one stage, but testing our kids for PTSD and only allowing the highest scores access to effective therapeutic measures to help them overcome their fears and face their trauma brings out the cynic in me that this was more about insurance mitigation than actually supporting them. That is my cynic. That is not necessarily the case. This motion is about remembering that recovery takes time, that we do make sure we identify all the stakeholders, and that if we are doing things, we communicate them well. I urge the government to properly debrief this case and other events, not to pat themselves on the back and say we followed the recommendations by professionals. Actually ask the stakeholders what they needed and what could they have done. And as I close, I should take this moment to remember Addison Stewart, Zane Miller, Josh Sheehan, Jalala Jones, Peter Dodd, Chase Harrison and their families. You are never far from our minds and our hearts.
Yeah.
I call the Premier.